Historical Museum. Yay! Well, just to have some hands-on. This stone is from Alexandria, Egypt, which is the first home of St. Mark after he left the Holy Land. And actually he founded the community that are called the Copts in Alexandria in Egypt and also in Cairo. This rock is from Gethsemane. This is the place where Jesus suffered right before his death and resurrection. This rock is from the Sea of Galilee. This is from the place that commemorates chapter 21 of the Gospel of John, which is the conversation between Jesus and St. Peter when he says, Peter, do you love me? That black one. This one is from the Acropolis in Athens, and this is where St. Paul was when he said, I'm going to preach to you about the unknown God. And when he talks about the resurrection of the dead, the philosopher said, we'll talk to you about that later. And then this is from Corinth, so the letter to the Corinthians, that's the place where St. Paul lived for a year and a half, in year 52 AD. And he wrote 2 letters to them. Then here we have some dirt from the Holy Land. And so you can see it over there. I like those little things.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Every time I came back from the Holy Land, I always bring a rock. And I forgot those rocks until I finally found them somewhere in one of my boxes when I was moving out. Okay, so we begin the museum by contemplating.
Sand. Where's the sand from? I'm sorry.
It's from the Holy Land. I don't know exactly where from, but yeah.
Just shoved it in your pocket.
Yep.
And
There you go. Now, we start with Jesus' incarnation, and that happens in the city of Nazareth. And that's a picture of the house of Mary. You can actually see the house. It was originally a cave with some structure built within the cave, and that's the place where Mary received the angel of the Lord that said, you're going to have a baby that's going to be named Jesus, and he will be the Savior. And so that's the place where Mary said yes to the Lord. And here is the exterior of the Basilica of the Annunciation in Nazareth. So that's the interior, and this is the exterior. And they made this church in the shape of a lighthouse, because wherever you are in Nazareth, wherever you are, you see, you can come forward, you can come. And so it looks like a lighthouse because Jesus is the light of the world, and the light shines in the darkness. The most important places of Jesus' ministry, besides Galilee, Bethlehem, where he was born, and they are in very different areas because Nazareth is in the north, Bethlehem is in the center south, and Jesus was born right here. Here there is a basilica. That's the Basilica of the Nativity of the Lord, right there. And here's Jerusalem and the walled city of Jerusalem, the Golden Gate. This is the view from the Mount of Olives. So if you're standing in the Mount of Olives, that's what you see. And here is where the Temple of Jerusalem used to stand. It was destroyed eventually in year 70 by the Romans. It was empty for a while until the Muslims came and they built the Dome of the Rock. This is the place, by the way, this is a flat platform because that's what Herod the Great did in the renovation that he did to the Temple of Solomon. But inside there is a hill. That's Mount Moriah, which according to the tradition is the same place where Abraham was about to sacrifice his son Isaac. Okay. And for the Muslim traditions, they say that Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven from that place too. That's why they built the Dome of the Rock right there. And as shiny as it is, it kind of gets the attention. But for us Christians, the most important are those domes that are back here. You can come closer to see, because those domes over there, the black ones, they are not as shiny as this one, but that's the place of Jesus' death and resurrection. That's Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, and just a few meters from there, where Jesus was raised from the dead. Just put a picture here from Indian River, because I just love that place. It talks about the mystery of Christ. Come over here. So, this picture that you see here is those domes, the domes that are built above Golgotha. And you can actually see a better picture of that here. You can see the domes right there. and behind you can see the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives. Yeah? So this is the most important place for us Christians because that's the place of Jesus' death and resurrection. Now, when Jesus was buried, his tomb would have looked very much like this one. You see the tomb with the rolling stone? This is a first century tomb in Nazareth, just 1 block away from the basilica. So this is not Jesus' tomb, but Jesus' tomb would have looked like this one. Unfortunately, Jesus' tomb has been destroyed through so many years of invasion. And the only thing that remains of Jesus' tomb is the bedrock over which the body of Jesus was laid. Okay? And that's this one here. Now, it's covered with marble for protection because normally the pilgrims come with hammer and nail, and they take a little, just like you see the little rocks that I brought, and they would bring up the tomb of Christ. I wouldn't dare to do that. But, so here I am celebrating Mass right there at the place of Jesus' resurrection. Now this is what the interior looks like. This is what the exterior looks like. There is a little, you can come closer, you don't have to be shy. And there is a chapel built around it. And so there is the rock is actually behind. It was last opened in the 70s, and one of my teachers was able to presence that very important moment when they saw the bedrock. But everything else is obviously artificially built later on. There is the big dome. This is the interior of the dome that we saw over there. This is Golgotha. So this is the place of Jesus' crucifixion. Only a few meters from here, and you can actually see the rock through the glass. In fact, I can show you in my picture book because you can see it better from there too. You can see the rock through the glass. You see that? Now, normally when we talk about Golgotha, we say Mount Calvary, right? So we think that it's a huge mount. In reality, it's not. It's just a rock formation that looks like a tiny, tiny little hill. Actually, it's just 1 story high. So we're in the 2nd floor, and right there you can see Golgotha. And this is the tomb of Christ. Let me see. This is the tomb of Christ from above the dome. And this is the interior of the tomb. Obviously, it's a chapel that is built around it. And this is the great dome that is that one over there. Okay? So it's the dome that covers the tomb of Christ. Now, here I am celebrating Mass in Golgotha. But this is Catholic Golgotha, which is side by side by Orthodox Golgotha. The true Golgotha is the Orthodox one because it has the rock. Ours is just a parallel chapel to it. Now, the Gospel of John tells us that in the place where Jesus had been crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden, there was a new tomb in which no one has been yet buried. So they laid Jesus there because of the Jewish preparation day, for the tomb was close by. And actually it was really close by. To the point that both places, the place of crucifixion and the place of resurrection of Jesus, now are under one building, the very same building, which is this one that you can see right here, which is the Basilica of the Resurrection, or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the Holy Land. You can see here, you see this orangey type of formation there? That's the rock of Golgotha. So crucifixion right here. And under the main dome, the tomb of Christ, you don't see it well there, but you can see an orangey formation here. That's the tomb of Christ, and Golgotha is over there. So it's within the same structure today. Now, it was originally a garden, like I said, with the tomb and everything. What happened is that Jesus was crucified, raised from the dead, year 30 AD, more or less, give or take. Then 100 years later, 125 AD, Emperor Hadrian, who was one of the most powerful Caesars in Rome, he conquered pretty much everything that you imagine around the Mediterranean. And he wanted to delete the memory of the Christians. Now, what he did is built on top of the tomb of Christ and on top of Golgotha 2 temples, one for Jupiter and one for Venus, because he wanted to delete the memory of Jesus' death and resurrection. But by doing that, he actually preserved it.
Right.
Because all the Christians knew that under Jupiter and Venus, they had the tomb of Christ and Golgotha. So actually he preserved it. Fast forward 200 years, in year 315, it is declared the freedom of religion for the empire, so Christians could worship openly, because for the first 3 centuries, Christians couldn't do that. And so Constantine the Great, he ordered to demolish the pagan temples that had been built on top of the tomb and on top of Golgotha, to build a great basilica, a Christian basilica, that is called the Basilica of the Resurrection. So this is the basilica that actually Constantine built, with the dome, and under the dome the tomb, and in the courtyard, in a corner of the courtyard, we have the rock of Golgotha exposed, open air. Okay. Now, of this basilica, nothing is left, except for a wall over here and a couple of foundations. Everything is gone from that, because when the Muslims invaded the Holy Land, destroyed everything. Okay? However, we have some records of what this basilica looked like because of several written sources, but the most important source that we have is a mosaic in a church in Jordan, which is the church of St. Michael, I think it is, in Madaba, Jordan. And this is a depiction of the city of Jerusalem in the 4th century. So this is Christian Jerusalem. And you have the main street, you see it? And you see here this structure? Is the structure here. Because you see the courtyard at the entrance, the basilica with the triangular roof, which is this one. You can barely see the second courtyard of Golgotha, which is a black square, which will be this one. And the round yellow thing, that will be the dome of the Anastas. Anastas in Greek is resurrection. So that's why we know that this basilica existed. Eventually, when the Crusaders came to reconquer the Holy Land, pushed away the Muslims for about 100 years. We're talking about in year 1000 to 1099. And they rebuilt everything, but in a different fashion, comprising both Golgotha and the place of the resurrection within a single structure. So no longer Golgotha was open air like in the original structure, but now it was under the main building. And that's pretty much what we have today in Jerusalem. Normally when we say Jerusalem, and I said many people, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, please pray for me at the Wailing Wall. And I'm like, well, that's fantastic, that's great, I'm going to pray for you at the Wailing Wall, that's great. But we have a greater place than the Wailing Wall, the place of Jesus' death and resurrection. Because there is a great misconception. Every time that, for example, the History Channel talks about the tomb of Christ, it is normally associated with another word, lost, the lost tomb of Christ. Finally we found it. And normally Jesus is there with Mary Magdalene and with other children and grandchildren. The tomb of Christ was never lost. It was always there. The Christians have always venerated it up to today. And thousands and thousands of pilgrims come. That's going to be in the video. Okay, so that was the Holy Land part. Now we're going to do the biblical part, okay? Oh, you want to go?
Where's it at?
Right here behind. We're going to hear you when you flush,
No,
though.
I'm okay.
Really, you can go through this door and there is a room and there is an extra.
Oh, okay.
It looks like a bedroom,
Okay.
and then there's a bathroom in it.
So, we are going to go backwards in time, okay? Okay, so we are in 2013. We're going to go to the 1500s, okay? When the printing press was invented by Gutenberg. Okay? Very important moment because finally, after thousands of years of writing, copying books by hand, finally we were able to massively reproduce books at very low cost compared to manuscripts. And this is a page of Gutenberg's Bible. It's in Latin, it's from, I think it's the first book of Kings. It is very difficult to read. But this text was printed from an actual reproduction of Gutenberg's printing press, which was as big as this room. It had an iron stencil. You have to put the ink on the iron stencil. You put the paper, you frame it, then you put a platform on top of that, then you have to take a big beam of wood and just push it so that it will press the ink against the page. And that stencil was made just for one page. So that means that they had to have hundreds of stencils for each page of the Bible in order to reproduce just one Bible. But you could push the machine and make many copies of the same page in one day. without having the need of many monks to copy. So this was a great revolutionary moment for for the world, actually, for literature, because we were able to copy the Bible in this case massively. So this was the time of the Protestant Reformation. But before that, everything we had of the Bible was manuscripts. Now, of the New Testament, we have ancient manuscripts, 5,700 manuscripts. 5,700. That's a lot. That's a lot. For the New Testament, what we do is take all the manuscripts and put them against the light, and wherever they coincide, because it's inevitable that some writers, some scribes would add things or subtract things. So all these ancient manuscripts are put against the light, and wherever they coincide to the ones that are most ancient, then we establish this is probably the most close text to the original, because we don't have any originals of the New Testament. For the Old Testament, it's a little bit different. For the Old Testament, there are plenty of copies of the Old Testament, but one day the rabbis sat down and they decided that one text was going to be the normative, and from here we're going to translate all the Old Testaments in the world. And that text is this one. This is Codex Leningrad. And Codex Leningrad was written in 1000 AD. And this basically is Old Testament. Basically the Hebrew Bible that we know. So wherever you go, whenever you go home and pull out your Bible and pull a book of the Old Testament, it's translated from that text. Now this is not the only Hebrew Bible. There are several other versions, but one day the rabbis decided that this is going to be the normative text, and this is what we're going to translate from. So, but in 1947, a very important discovery was made. And that discovery was the Dead Sea Scrolls. Have you heard about that? Mm-hmm. In a place called Qumran. They were radically important. Why? Because suddenly we jumped not just 1,000 years back in time to this text, but 2,000 years, because the Dead Sea Scrolls are from the time of Christ. They don't talk about Christ because they are about the Old Testament, but they are at the same time of Christ. Okay? So how did they discover them? They discovered them by accident. One day a shepherd boy in the Holy Land near the Dead Sea, he was looking for a lost sheep. Interesting. Mm-hmm. And he thought that the lost sheep was lost into a cave. So he threw a stone to the cave, hoping to chase the sheep. He heard that something broke. When he goes up there, he realizes that there are hundreds of clay jars, just like this one. But obviously this is a miniature, but the originals are like this size. And when he opened one of them, what he discovered were scrolls. Now he didn't know what they were about. He didn't know what he was discovering at that moment. Eventually, when those scrolls were studied, they found like over 30 copies of the Gospel of the book of Isaiah, 25 copies of Genesis, and of every possible book that you can imagine of the Old Testament. All of them are in there. And they are from the time of Christ. And when they began to compare this text to this text, they found that the coincidence was about of 95%. That's pretty darn good. Have you ever played the broken telephone game? Okay? I mean, this is 1,000 years difference, and that's pretty good. The major difference between the two texts was that the text of Qumran, time of Christ, was only a consonant text. It didn't have vowels, because Hebrew originally didn't have vowels. Okay? While the text that we have here in Leningrad Codex has vowels. You can actually see, if you come, you can see, for example, the big letters. You read it from right to left, by the way. So like, for example, Genesis is here, because this is the first page of the book. Oh, it's the opposite. So you can actually see the big consonants, and then you see dots above and below. Do you see those? Mm-hmm. Above and below, the dots and the lines, those are vowels. While in this text, you only see consonants. You don't see, like this. You only see consonants. You don't see any dots above or below. You notice that? It's pretty much like texting. you know? Yeah, shortcut, exactly. So they knew what was the pronunciation. But as time went by, the writers, the scribes decided, no, let's put some vowels, otherwise we're going to forget how to pronounce. One of the major problems of pronunciation will be the name of God. What is the correct pronunciation? Is it Yahweh or is it Jehovah? Because they have the same consonants, you know. So that's why the Masoretes, the ones that actually put the dots on it, decided to put the vowels so that there will be no confusion about the pronunciation. So these are the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, this is a reproduction from an actual Dead Sea Scroll. And this is from the book of the Psalms. This right here in the second line here, beginning here, is the famous psalm that says, I rejoice when I heard them say, let us go to the Lord's house. And now our feet are standing within your gates, Jerusalem, within your walls. So Psalm 121. So these are all psalms of the ascent, the psalms that were sung every time people went on pilgrimage to the temple. So this will be time of Christ, more or less. Okay, and this one will be 1,000 years ago. Old Testament. Here is the new. Because for the new, if we go back, there have been many Christian Bibles, but if we go back, this Bible that I have here is called Codex Sinaiticus. Okay, Codex Sinaiticus. And this is the oldest Christian Bible that exists today, up to this point, until we discover another one. And this was written originally in parchment. So this is cow skin or sheep skin. And so it's a very durable material because you can print in it and then stays there forever. Now this actual book is split in 4 parts, and it is kept in 4 different places. The most important place, because that's where it was originated, Sinai in Egypt. Another portion of that is in Leipzig. There is another part of it in Great Britain, in the British Library, and also in St. Petersburg, in Russia. So what they did a few years ago, some experts of the Bible, what they did is did an entire picture of every single page in the 4 places, and they brought them all together and printed in one form. You can actually access this online. It's called codexsinaiticus.org. It's a website, but I wanted to have the printed version. So I got this one on sale, which was great. And so basically it has the entire Bible from Genesis to Apocalypse, but it's in Greek.
Yeah.
It's in Greek. That's Hebrew. The Old Testament was written mainly in Hebrew, small portion in Greek. Those are what is called the Deuterocanonical book, and the text of the New Testament was in Greek. Now, this Old Testament, half of this Bible, is in actual Greek. That means there is a translation of a previous Hebrew text, which is not that one. Now, we don't know which Hebrew text this one was translated from, but it gives us an idea of what would have the Hebrew text said. And if you compare that, pretty much match. Again, this is a very good preservation process. Now, when you copy the Bible, like I said, you add things, you subtract things. One fascinating thing that I found when I was doing my thesis was on the Gospel of John, chapter 2. And it was the wedding at Cana, and then Jesus casting the temple vendors. You all remember that he took a whip of cords and threw them all? Okay. Some manuscripts would say, and Jesus took a whip of cords and threw them all out of the temple. Some other manuscripts add a word, a Greek word, hos, which means like, sort of. So, and Jesus took like a whip of cords, or sort of a whip of cords, and threw them all out of the temple. Because how could you dare that the master would use violence? You know? So that scribe, theologically, he couldn't begin to imagine that Jesus did some violence. So he added something in there. But the great majority of manuscripts don't say that. So this is just the little differences that exist in some manuscripts. There are other manuscripts that the scribe is so tired that when he finishes writing a book, he said, "Amen, thanks be to God, I finished." You know, and he wrote that down. And actually, if you see the text here, if you can come, this is, for example, the great hymn of love. So, love is patient, love is kind, love never fails. This is 1 Corinthians, okay? You can actually see some additions. You can see some scratching, you know, there is a mistake here, there is a clarification over here, because it wasn't just writing the text. Somebody else had to come and proofread it. And sometimes the scribe is copying, he has his original and then he's copying, and maybe he skipped a line. And that happens many times. That's why it's so important, the advancement of the printing press. Well, anyway, so this is 350 AD. It's a collection of books. The other competing Bible is Codex Vaticanus, and Codex Vaticanus is in the Vatican City, and it's also from the same time, 350 AD, more or less. So this is after Christianity was legal, okay? But obviously, this is far from the original text of the New Testament, because when St. Paul wrote his letters, he never imagined they were going to be collected into one single book. And when John was writing his gospel, he wasn't thinking that his book was going to be next to Luke's. You know what I'm saying? The Bible, Biblos, means collection of books, library. But that's a later thing that we did as a church. So this is far from the original texts. We have to go farther back in time. So that's why we go to this one over here. This one here is the first page of the oldest full copy of the Gospel of John that we possess. And this is from 200 AD. So this is the first page. So I would say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And blah, 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 continues the whole story, and then at the end it says, and the Word of God pitched his tent among us, and the Word became flesh, and dwelt among us, pitched his tent among us. So that's the first chapter of the Gospel of John, 200 AD. Far from John, because John wrote his Gospel in year 90 AD. So we're talking about 110 years after. But this one here is a reproduction of the earliest possible copy that we have of the entire New Testament. And it is also from the Gospel of John. This is 125 AD. It is the top corner of a page. It was a full page. It's written in both sides. And it is chapter 19 of the Gospel of John also. And it is a conversation between Jesus and Pontius Pilate when Jesus is under the trial, you know. And so there is only a gap of 35 years between the original of John, 90 AD, and the earliest manuscript that we have, which is that one, written in papyrus. Now you may say 35 years, anything can happen in 35 years, right? But if we really compare this text and the Bible, considering the New Testament that we have 5,700 copies, it's pretty good. For example, many of us had to read during school at least parts of the Iliad and the Odyssey. When was the Iliad and the Odyssey written? 800 before Christ. What are the earliest copies that we have of the Iliad and Odyssey, considering that we don't have the originals from Homer? They come from 1000 AD. That's a gap of 1800 years between the original Iliad and Odyssey and the earliest manuscript we have. And nobody dares to claim that, oh, this is not really the work of Homer. You know what I'm saying? But when it comes to the Bible, everybody questions everything, right?
Yeah.
Even though the gap is so small, only 35 years, you know, in that particular manuscript that I show you. You know? So these are the earliest manuscripts that we have of the New Testament itself. Now, just one more thing, and I'll let you go.
That's count as church.
The only original that I have in this museum is a first century lamp. Do you remember when Jesus says the story of the 10 virgins, that they don't have enough oil for the lamps? This is the oil lamp. You will have a wick over here, and you would put the oil inside, and you would just light it. You know, you can go ahead, but just don't break it, okay? This was found in excavation near Jerusalem. Okay, so then when on other moments when Jesus says, "You're the light of the world, you're the salt of the earth. Let your light shine so that everybody could see." You don't light a lamp and put it under a bushels basket. You actually put it so that everybody could see. And so in the same way, your light should shine for the whole world, right? And so that's the oil lamp that he was talking about.
And that, how old is that again?
This is from the time of Christ. This will be the first century.
Oh my goodness.
Could be the time, could be a little bit after. We don't know really exactly. So.
Did you ever do an archaeological dig
Huh?
when you were there?
I was like, Christ could have held that in his hand.
Yeah, that
could
could
have.
be.
You could have.
That could be. Now, just because I like you guys,
I'll bring it.
I have some reproductions of the widow's mite. There are plenty of copies
One of
out there
those.
going on.
We have one.
You have one?
Thank you.
Okay. So basically, it's just a reproduction of a cheap coin of the time. We don't know if it's exactly that one, you know, but just to symbolize that this probably was a very low value coin, but the woman that went and put that offering in the temple actually gave more than the ones that had a lot of money, because she was giving everything that she had. You know? So that will be Jesus' time. There are other things that I have ordered that they haven't arrived yet, and I'll show you later. We're going to go farther back in time. We're going to go to the time of the Temple of Solomon, that was built around 900 before Christ. And so inside the temple, what they would have is the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant was carried by the Israelites as they were going through the desert after Moses in 1250 before Christ had led them out of Egypt through the desert, and eventually after meeting in a tent for so many times, finally they had a temple, and inside the temple was the Ark of the Covenant. So it was carried. It had two angels, two seraphims, and it had a platform over here, and God always spoke from the middle. So then inside you have the contents, because you have Moses' staff, you also have the Ten Commandments, and the manna from the desert. So you can see all of that. We don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is. It got lost in time, even though some Ethiopian Christians believe that they have it in the country of Ethiopia. We're not sure about that.
So that's the latest they think might be Ethiopia.
Yeah, well, they have a little.
claim.
They claim that they have the place, but they haven't shown it to anybody. So, and we go farther back in time to Moses' time, and sometime even before, the Hittites. The Hittites were a very important culture, civilization in what is today the Anatolia, or what is today Turkey. And so this is an ancient iPad. So it's a tablet, and it is a calculator, and this contains the oldest type of writing that exists in the world, which is the cuneiform writing. Basically, you would do a clay, and then with some kind of sharp nail or something, you would make shapes. That's the most ancient form of writing that exists even today. So you can see that. I don't really know how to use it, but that's and it has Wi-Fi. So that's a very ancient form of writing. So I'm going to show you just a couple of things from over
Wait,
there.
we got one more thing in the coins.
Over here. Oh, it's yours. You can take it. Then, normally when the Old Testament was written, it was written in scrolls, you know, just like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like this is a scroll of the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible. I don't know if you remember when Jesus, chapter 6 of the Gospel of John, Jesus goes to Capernaum, he enters the synagogue, and he begins to give a teaching. But before giving the teaching, he reads from prophet Isaiah. Exactly. And the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has sent me to bring glad tidings to the poor. And he says that when he finished, he rolled the scroll and gave it to the attendant. Because books were not invented yet. So they had scrolls. So this is the most ancient form for the Jewish people to read their text. And actually they use the Torah like this way. They don't touch the words because the words is so sacred. So they have to use a finger. And so this is a yod. Yod in Hebrew means hand. And so you touch the word, you follow the lines with this one. So this is a beautiful liturgical way of reading the text. Actually, Hebrew people read the entire Torah in a year. So basically they take the entire text, do a mathematical formula, and chop it in 352 weeks, basically. Pretty much like what we do with our lectionary, but they do it with the Torah. So this helps for the continuous reading of the text. But what happens if you are in the last chapter of Leviticus, and suddenly you realize, you remember a verse from the second chapter of Genesis? It's very difficult to go and get because Genesis will be on this side. So it is great for liturgies, but it's very impractical for quotations or for citing. So eventually the rabbis chopped this text and bound them together at the end, and so invented what for us is the book, but the original term or name was codex. So this was a great technological advance because you're able to flip the pages and easily quote, from the scripture. This one here, it's a little reproduction of a flask, a Greek flask. The flasks are very important in the Bible, especially you remember when the woman goes to Jesus' feet and she anoints Jesus' feet with perfume. All kinds of flasks of this type would be used at the time of Christ. But this is from Greece. Another lamp. This is a chalice carved wood from the Holy Land. You can pass it around. And this one is the most famous image of the Eucharist that we have. It's a mosaic of the fishes and loaves. And this is actually from a tiny little church in Galilee that is called Tabgha. And this church is a church of the multiplications of fishes and loaves. And last but not least, this is some olive wood carving from Bethlehem, from the place where Jesus was born. Do you have the... Oh, my iPad. Thank you. And I think this is pretty much it. There are many other things that I want to hang, but those pictures over there, actually from the first Christians, those are this is ancient laser pointer. Those are pictures from the catacombs in Rome. So Christianity was developed in Rome, thank God, because of the preaching of St. Paul and also of St. Peter. They were sacrificed both in Rome. Eventually, the Christians became a great movement in Rome, and even though they were persecuted, they spread like crazy. And this happened within the first 300 years of Christianity. And they developed their cemeteries outside of the city, underground. This catacomb is the catacombs of St. Calixtus. And the catacomb, Joe, you've been there. We celebrated Mass there, right? Wasn't that great? St. Calixtus, 4 levels underground, is all carved because they have a volcanic rock called tufa. And that volcanic rock, when you carve it, is soft, but as soon as it hits, the oxygen hits, it hardens. And so underground, they built 4 levels. They have 17 kilometers of corridors, if you put them all in line. And they have 500,000 bodies. And this catacomb served from 220 AD all the way to the 5th century. So, and here is the crypt of the popes. This is one of the early crypts of popes, even before the Vatican was used as the place for the popes. And so here you can see some of the mausoleums and one of the oldest representation of Jesus in an image. Because originally, first of all, they wouldn't depict Jesus. They would depict the lamb. They would depict the cross, but more in a shape of an anchor, because they didn't want to give the idea of a Christian symbol. They would use a dove, the fish, but they would not use the image of Christ itself. The most ancient images of Christ is baby Jesus on the lap of Mary. And then later on, Jesus as a teacher. And why did they do baby Jesus in the lap of Mary? Because they want to stress the humanity of Christ. Because in the first 3 centuries, it was easier for people to believe that Jesus was God than to believe that he was human. It's the opposite to our times. Because people more believe in Jesus as human and not as God. Okay? In the first centuries, it was easier to believe that he was God. Because then he would be one more God, just like Zeus, like Apollo, like Venus, and all of this. You know? It would be one more God in the many gods of the Roman Empire. But the Christians believed that, yes, he was God, but he was also human. Which for the Roman mentality is, you're nuts. This is not possible. To believe that a God can be human. You can have a semi-God, but you cannot have a God that is fully human and fully God. And so the Christians tried to emphasize his humanity by putting baby Jesus in his lap. Only later on, they depicted him as a teacher. Okay, I'll shut up.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.